Hello, welcome. This is Wayne Scaife. Welcome to Knowledge is Power. So, I want to start off, make sure you can see the whole shirt. Slavery is white history. How we survived it is black history. And that's a true statement. Make sure y'all see that shirt. So today I want to talk about Juneteenth. And it's important that we know the truth and the history about Juneteenth. And I have to be honest, I've only known about Juneteenth for probably 5 years, if that. I never really did until I started reading about it. And once I learned about it, and I've been saying this for the last 2-3 years or so, once I learned about it, I didn't understand how we as in black people, got so attached to the lie of Juneteenth. Because Juneteenth, well, the story behind Juneteenth, well, the perception, I take that back, this is the word I want to use. The perception behind Juneteenth is not based on the history and the reality and the truth of Juneteenth. And that's what I want to talk about today. That's why I'm not so high on the Juneteenth celebration. So this is what I want to talk about. I got to get used to looking into this camera. I'm looking at myself on the monitor instead of looking in the camera. So that's why it looks like I'm not doing eye contact, because I'm watching myself in the monitor instead of looking this way at the camera. So there's 4 points I want to make about Juneteenth, and I'll try to make this short. This is what's not taught in the history. This is what's not taught to us, black Americans, about the truth about Juneteenth. We don't get it in the history books. We didn't get it in school. So a lot of stuff we just follow along with what people were saying. So I'm going to tell you about Juneteenth, the truth about Juneteenth, and why I don't celebrate it. So y'all get ready for this one. So there's 4 points I want to touch on about Juneteenth. And some of y'all might say, oh, what does that have to do with Juneteenth? I'm going to tell you. So the first point is the Civil War. And I'm not going to go deep into this stuff. I'm just going to touch on the basis of this stuff. So the Civil War started basically in April of 1861, and it went on to around May of 1865. And the Civil War was a war between the northern states, known as the Union, and the southern states, known as the Confederate States or the Confederacy. So the main issue of the Civil War was slavery. It wasn't the only issue, but it was the main issue, was slavery. The North wanted to end it, but the South wanted to keep it. Now remember what I just said. The North, which was the Union, wanted to end it. And the South, which is the Confederacy, which was about 11 states, wanted to keep it. Remember that point. I'm going to get to that later. The second issue, like I said, I'm not going to go over this. If you want to learn about the Civil War, y'all can read up on it on your own like I've done. The second issue I want to talk about is the Emancipation Proclamation. And we've all heard about that. So the Emancipation Proclamation was a military order issued by President Abraham Lincoln. Now, I want y'all to pay close attention to this. It was a military order issued by President Abraham Lincoln on January 1st, 1865. So the Emancipation Proclamation was only for the Confederate States. And it basically ended slavery for those Confederate states. There were 4 border states. Now, these states were in the Union, northern states. They were Delaware, Kentucky, Maryland, and Missouri. Remember that point. These states were in the Union, but they had slaves. So think about that. Think about what I just said. This is the lie about the Emancipation Proclamation freed the slaves. That's a lie. It did not. The Emancipation Proclamation only applied to the 11 Confederate states in the South. It did not apply to the northern states that were in the Union. And there were 4 northern states that had slaves. So when people say the Emancipation Proclamation ended slavery, that is not true. It did not. For those Confederate states, it did. But it didn't apply to the Union, the 4 northern states. So basically, Abraham Lincoln did it to weaken. He signed it, and it was only for the Confederate states. He signed it to weaken the Confederate Army. That's basically what it was for. One of the reasons, I'll say, the main reason was to weaken the Federal Army so the northern states could defeat them, because they had slaves fighting. They had slaves being forced to fight with the Confederate states. And remember, although Abraham Lincoln was this great person, Lincoln, he already said, if I could save, his quote was, if I could save the Union without freeing any slaves, I would do it. So he freed those slaves so the Union could win that battle. And I'm talking about the Civil War. So that's my second point. First point was the Civil War. Second point was the Emancipation Proclamation. Third point, June 19th, 1865. Remember, the Emancipation Proclamation was given January 1st, 1865 for the Confederate States. There was one holdout state, which was Texas. So on June 19th, General Granger rode into Galveston, Texas to enforce the Emancipation Proclamation that was given 5 months earlier in January. So all June 19th was, General Granger's order was an extension. He was basically telling them what the Emancipation Proclamation said, because apparently they didn't get that message in Texas, or they were saying they didn't get it. And he had to go, once the Union had defeated the Confederate Army, the Union went in there, Gordon Granger went in there and gave them, which is basically some general orders, but the main one was General Order Number 3, saying that all slaves are free. He went into Galveston, Texas, and there were approximately 250,000 enslaved people in the state of Texas, 250,000 people. But when he went into Galveston, Texas, there were only about 1,200 enslaved people in the city of Galveston. So he still had to reach the whole state. But he got there on June 19th, and that's the day they come up with Juneteenth. They combine June and 19th, and they come up with Juneteenth. And they say slaves were free. That was the end of slavery. But it was not. Because even within June 19th, some places in Texas, some of those slave owners refused to free their slaves. Some of the slave owners, when their slaves were starting to leave after they found out they were free, they killed them. They'd rather them to be dead than the free man or free woman. They were killing them. So June 19th, the order was given that everybody in Texas should be set free. All the slaves in Texas should be set free. Now, here's the thing about June 19th. When they say that was the end of slavery, like I said, it wasn't. So we celebrate this day like, oh, it's the end of slavery. No, it wasn't. Because 4 states, Delaware, Kentucky, Missouri, and Maryland, were in the North. Emancipation Proclamation didn't apply to them. So they still had slaves after June 19th. So that's why I say I don't celebrate June 19th as the end of slavery, because it wasn't. So those states, the Emancipation Proclamation couldn't be enforced in those states because they weren't part of the Confederacy. Those states were part of the Union, and it would take an act of Congress to free slaves from those 4 states. Because the Confederacy would consider themselves their own, they considered themselves separate from the United States. So it would take an act of Congress to free those slaves in the North. And that's when I get to my 4th point, the 13th Amendment. I told you this is going to be a short video. And I want y'all to go research this and learn more, because there's a whole lot more to this. I'm just giving y'all the basics. But there's a whole lot of history in this, even going back to before the Emancipation Proclamation was signed. Learn about the Confiscation Act. When slaves, I'm getting off point. I'll get back to that. So the 13th Amendment. 13th Amendment passed. There was 36 states total. They had to have 3/4 the majority, 3/4 the votes of those 36 states to pass the 13th Amendment. Georgia, they needed 27 of 36 states, which is 3/4. Georgia was the last state to sign. So they got 27 out of 36 states to vote for the 13th Amendment, and the 13th Amendment passed. What was the 13th Amendment? It ended slavery. It passed on December 6th, 1865. So if you want to know a date when slavery really ended for everybody, all states, it was December 6th, 1865. And if you want to get technical, when it was actually ratified, that was on December 18th. But the official date, when it was actually signed, was December 6th, 1865. That is when slavery ended. It did not end on June 19th, 1865, because there were 4 states that still had slaves. 4 Union states. And I want to say this, and I'm not bashing anybody, but we've always taught about the Confederate. But even when he was forced to free slaves in the Confederate states in the South, those northern states where we were so high on and the North was good and great and all this, they still had slaves. It had to take an amendment for them to end slavery on them. Why didn't they just do it? Just let their slaves go when the Emancipation Proclamation passed, even though it wasn't for them. Why didn't they say, "Oh, this is bad. This is not right. We're just going to free these slaves"? No. They didn't want to end slavery even when Abraham Lincoln passed the Emancipation Proclamation. So this history of the North was so great for blacks and all this stuff, that's not technically true, because they held on to their slaves, and it took an act of Congress to make them free their slaves. So that's when slavery officially ended, was on December 6, 1865. It wasn't on June 19th, like we were so told, and we do this Juneteenth celebration and a bunch of nonsense to me. That's why I don't celebrate it. And I haven't, like I said, for about 4 or 5 years, because I learned the truth. Because while y'all celebrating June 19th, there was still slavery going on. That don't make no sense to me. And then y'all want to say it's the end of slavery. No, it wasn't. So this is my issue. If you're going to celebrate June 19th, 1865, and slaves are still going on, slavery was still going on, and you saying it was the end of slavery, you might as well go back to January 1st, 1865, when Emancipation Proclamation was passed, and use that. Because neither date there was freed the slaves, freed all the slaves, I should say. So if you're going to celebrate June 19th instead of December 6th, you might as well go all the way back to January 1st, because that's when that Emancipation Proclamation was originally issued. And June 19th was an enforcement of it in Texas. And it was only in Texas. Last holdout state. That's something else they don't tell you. That June 19th was only for people in Texas. The other states had freed their slaves in the South. Texas was a holdout state. But like I said, even after Texas freed their slaves, there was 4 states in the North that still had slavery. So Juneteenth was not the end of slavery. So I hope you got a better understanding of what Juneteenth is about. You want to celebrate it? Fine. You want to celebrate it and enlighten people and tell them, yeah, technically we celebrate it, but the actual date, the end of slavery, was December 6th. I have no problem with that either. But during that whole celebration of Juneteenth, and I went down there just to see if any educational stuff was going on other than, I don't even want to get into that. Any educational stuff was going on other than reading General Granger's general order. So what about that general order? It didn't mean anything. Not to the rest of the slaves. Tell that to the slaves in Delaware or Kentucky or Missouri or Maryland about General Granger's order. It didn't apply to them. And they were still being beat and killed. And we celebrated like it was some big thing for all states. Yeah, it affected 250,000 people, 250,000 slaves. But there are a lot more in those states that were still practicing slavery. So instead of when we celebrate it, when y'all celebrate it, because I don't celebrate it, when y'all celebrate it, at least do some education and let them know the truth. Yeah, technically we celebrated, but it technically wasn't the end of slavery. But it wasn't the end of slavery. Don't say technically either, because that's the wrong word. You can say we celebrated, but it really wasn't the end of slavery. That's the day when General Granger rode into Galveston, Texas, and freed the slaves in Texas. But there was still slavery going on until the 13th Amendment was passed on December 6, 1865, which was officially the end of slavery in the United States. The last point I want to make is July 4th, the 4th of July, Independence Day. The difference, we still got black people that celebrate that day like it was our independence, black people's independence. It wasn't. It was America's became independent from Great Britain, July 4th, 1776. There were slaves. Black people didn't get any independence on that day. They were still enslaved. So to celebrate that day like you celebrate Juneteenth I don't get it. I don't celebrate July 4th. Black people weren't even considered part of America. They weren't even considered American. Actually, they weren't even considered a person. They weren't even considered people. They were considered chattel. I'm going to say that again. Black people weren't even considered people. They were considered chattel. That's why they called it chattel slavery. So it's not an Independence Day for black people. It's not a Freedom Day for black people. It was nothing to black people. So when we say we celebrate Juneteenth, and then you turn around and celebrate the 4th of July, that's what's called an oxymoron. And I don't get it. This is black history I'm talking about. This is not, I'm the black man against the white man. That's not what this is about. This is telling y'all about black history. That's what this program is about. So this is not, I'm for black and I'm against white. That's not what this channel is about. I'm giving y'all black history. And this is the truth. Independence Day does not apply to black people. Independence Day, black people were enslaved. There was no freedom. There was no independence for us. We weren't even a part of America. So to say we should celebrate the 4th, and I know some of y'all going to have y'all cookouts, that's fine. If you want to say that a gathering day, but just remember what the 4th of July represents. That's what it's about. July 4th, 1776. And Frederick Douglass was an abolitionist. And all the abolitionists is, they fought to abolish slavery. And at the time, he was a Republican because back then, Republicans then were like Democrats now. And along the civil rights, which is another story. This is why y'all need to read history. Along the signing of the Civil Rights Act, it was a switch when the Republicans and the Democrats' ideologies changed. So the way the Democrats think now, that's the way the Republicans thought back then. And the way the Republicans think now, that's the way the Democrats thought back then. So black people were Republicans back then because everything that they stood for was in line with the Democrats' thinking today. But it switched when the Democrat Party back then was trying to go against the civil rights movement. And that's when you notice the switch. So Frederick Douglass, I'm going to say this last part, then I'm going to end it. Frederick Douglass wrote a book. What was the name of the book? What to the Slave is the 4th of July. Even he talked about it. What to the slave is the 4th of July. And I got a quote from that, and I got to read it. It says, the 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice. I must mourn. I'm going to say that again. Frederick Douglass said in his book, What to the Slave is the 4th of July. He said, the 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice. I must mourn. So that's what I wanted to tell y'all. Civil War, Emancipation Proclamation, June 19th, 1865, and December 6th, 1865, which was the signing of the 13th Amendment, which freed slaves, which ended slavery, and it officially. So June 19th did not end slavery. It just ended slavery in the state of Texas. that held on to slavery after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed January 1st, 1865. So keep celebrating Juneteenth if you want. I have no problem with it, but please tell everybody the real meaning. And the next time we have a Juneteenth celebration, let's make it more about an educational thing. Let's make Juneteenth educational. And instead of doing stuff that don't apply to Juneteenth, let's make it a learning experience. That's all I ask. That's the end of this. I'll be making more videos. My next video, I'm not going to tell you what it is because I might change it, but I'm going to show you this shirt again. Slavery is white history. How we survived it is black history. I'll be making more videos. That's what this page is for. It's not to bash the white man, not to talk down to anybody. It's educational. That's all it is. We need to learn more black history facts. We need to study more about black history. That's all this is about. So thank y'all for watching, and I'll see you on my next video.